Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're here in YouTube and you'd like to actually be part of the conversation, you can click on the little link down below and you'll end up in Zoom. Once you're in Zoom, if you click on the little link down below, you'll end up in Mukana, and that's where you actually become a producer of the show. Your questions, your comments, your votes are what drive the entire show. We don't have a run of show. We just have you. So go ahead and ask those questions and be part of the conversation. If you think you can answer some of those questions, you can come as early as 6 o'clock to see if your system's working, see if everything's ready to go. But you need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the mic check to make sure that everything is truly ready to go for the show. First hour is general discussion, anything you want to ask about virtual or media production. And the second hour is something that we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. Today we have Felipe BAEZ and Stephen Moyer are going to talk about, they're going to talk about a production they did for HBO called Q Into the Storm, and they're going to talk about the whole back-end production and how it actually got produced remotely. We're really excited about that. Thursday, tomorrow, we're going to talk about working with talent. Friday, we're going to have Andy Carluccio back to talk about Streamweaver and how that actually works. Saturday is the long day. We have education for the second hour and kind of the third hour. Then Nick Justishin will be in to talk about Unreal. We're all going to have a discussion about that at 10. At noon, we're doing a test kitchen. We're working with Mad in the Kitchen and we're testing recipes for a couple weeks out. So if you want to come in and cook informally with all of us and talk through the recipes and so on and so forth, we're doing that test kitchen. We'll put out the base recipe tomorrow for you to go out shopping and work on it. But we're really figuring it out. So it's not an organized thing. Don't expect a tutorial. You're building the tutorial while we're sitting there. So, and then at 3 o'clock, we open up the doors, but at 5 o'clock is when we start cooking with Mad in the Kitchen. And today, this week, we're making quesadillas for Cinco de Mayo. So it should be a lot of fun. So that's, but that will start, doors open at 3, cooking starts at 5. Discussion about what happened starts at about 6:30 right after the show, and we literally are breaking down the whole production, what worked, what didn't work, and it's really not just sometimes people have like after show things and we're just kind of doing it for the audience. You're actually helping us design the show. So when you watch the show in the pre-show, during the show, and then part of the conversation afterwards, you actually become part of that show. So it's an interesting model and it's a lot of fun. All right, Bill, let's get into it.
Diving in, James in Dublin, Ireland has our first question this morning, and he says, sitting at a desk for extended periods of time, what are the panel's favorite chairs and why? Note is, which is better, Herman Miller Aeron or the Herman Miller Mira? And is the Aeron worth the extra money?
I will say, we did say no politics, no religion,
tools, and chairs.
Yeah, and chairs. Like power tools and chairs. Like so. This is a complicated one. There is a lot of people in the Herman Miller crowd here, so I think that one's a hard one to get around. Go ahead, Paul. Can't hear you, Paul.
Okay, I've got a Mira chair right here. I have both. I have both of them. Let me adjust my camera and zoom back so you can see it. This is the Mira chair. And you can see it's got an adjustable back. You can raise this up and down for back
lumbar support.
It's got adjustable arms. It goes up, it goes down.
It's great.
An amazing chair, and Chris Fenwick is the one that.
So he has the slightly padded back version.
It's ugly.
It's very ugly, but
Go ahead.
It's really comfortable.
Go ahead, John.
Really comfortable.
My streaming company, we had over 150 I'm an Aeron lover. I have the old ones and the new ones. The thing about the Aerons, I bought 2 brand new ones. You have to make sure if you want it adjustable or non-adjustable, because I like the arms that swing out. It's very useful. And note that there's 3 different sizes. That's the important note to know about the Aeron.
Go ahead, Aeron. Sorry, I said Aeron. Aeron. Aeron.
I'm Aeron. I have been a big fan of the Mira as well. I've had the Mira 1 and now the Mira 2. I also have an Embody, which is the high-end version, which is phenomenal if you're sitting all day. Yeah. The Embody it's like $1,200, but it's phenomenal.
So is the Mira if you load it up. Go ahead, Chris.
I would like to point out that John Preto cannot be an Aeron fan because he doesn't know how to pronounce it. It's Aeron.
To get off.
We're getting rough. All right.
To
So
get off of the
one
Herman Miller
one
thing,
more
though,
thing, one more thing.
Steelcase Leap is really good too.
still
One
case
more
lead.
thing, these mirrors are going for $300. That's a street price in Austin, Texas now.
Well, I think pre-owned, I think is the street price. Yeah. So the anyway, yeah. So and I will admit my Mira 2 is showing up on Monday. All right, next question.
Bought mine in 81, so in today's dollars, that's cheap.
Mhm.
Eric Price in Leavenworth, Kansas is up with our next question. And he says, I run the on-screen graphics for our church service stream from home. I must monitor over the phone to make graphics changes in sync with the service. There's a feed delay, but phone drops audio often during closing music, and I can't tell if it's over to stop the broadcast. Are there any recommendations for better remote monitoring in this circumstance?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
What I would do if I had to be a part of something like that is I would set up a computer, a webcam, and just set up a Zoom window, because I would like to see what's going on in real time. I mean, I've
Mhm.
even done it in a studio. Alex, I know that you for a while had all your people in separate rooms, and I've done that during COVID, where we actually just set up a Zoom meeting, because when I tell the tape op, like I'm like 1,000 years old, stand by to roll, I want to see that his hand is on the thing, and so I would do that, and then pipe really good audio in to the Zoom thing and monitor that way. That's how
Good,
I'd
Mickey.
do it.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, just for the monitoring thing, if just in case you are using a web conferencing app to pipe the monitor back to you, if it's Zoom, make sure original sound is enabled, because if it's not, it will read music as noise and try to get rid of that.
Yeah, JJ.
The way I do this is I control it from the streaming side. So I presently stream to YouTube, and since there's a 32-second delay I stop the stream once I've faded black, and I watch it in real time, and then on YouTube I just stop the stream at the end of the stream. So I never have to worry about whether I hear it correctly or not.
Go
And
ahead,
I'm doing it every day this week because it's Holy Week.
Guy.
Yeah, if you could swing $49 too with the Zoom Room, you can do auto answer, which means you could dial in there or call it, and the Zoom Room will answer. Otherwise, I'm not sure how you would join the remote end to the call.
Right. Next question.
Tommy Chance, who this week is in the panel. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you. I hope I haven't been messing up your last name too much. And he asks, how can I change my Discord user on my laptop? It defaults to another user, and I've tried installing and reinstalling with no luck.
I've had that problem. I have a couple users an old user that just didn't work, and for some reason Discord keeps coming up with it. I know that I'm logged in correctly on my phone, and the way I make sure that I'm joining the right with the right user is that I use the little thing where it shows you a QR code, and then you put up your phone from Discord. You use your photo on your phone or whatever. It'll take you to Discord, and then you hit it, and it'll actually authenticate you from your phone to the desktop, and it ensures that you're in the right one. But yeah, I have a similar problem where it seems like every time my Discord jumps in, it wants to go to the one that I don't use anymore. Go ahead, Mickey.
Within the Discord app, on the lower left corner, there's a little gear icon. If you click on that, that brings you to the settings of your Discord client. At the bottom of that menu, there is a log out button, so you can switch users disabling your account. Yeah. So. But what happens is, what's odd about it for me is that I'm not in that account. But when I want to join something, for some reason, Discord immediately wants to put me into an old account that doesn't exist, which doesn't make any sense. Anyway, there is some login issue there, because it's not a matter of being in the wrong. Like literally, I'm in the account trying to join a new Discord server, and it immediately wants to put me in a different Discord server, an account. It happens to me literally every time I add a new server. And so I have to be, I understand what he's asking. I just don't know how to fix it, other than I'm always logged into my phone. I use my phone to, I say it's not me, and then I use my phone to authenticate to get back in. There is some bug there, but I don't know exactly where it's coming from. And it's because if you've created two accounts. And it appears that if you create accounts with numbers, it's the lower number. So anyway, next question.
Comes from Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. And Ari says, in Mad in the Kitchen, the full frame shots do not have any branding, for example, a logo in the corner and so forth, as opposed to the composite multi-shot frames with graphic overlay. Is this a conscious creative decision or just happens to be so? And if so, why?
I make that creative decision. So I put very few graphics over top of the live graphics. There's a few reasons for that. One is that I feel like it's very old media. Like, so I just feel like we've worked with a lot of social influencers, and they're like, yeah, bugs are kind of old, old media. Like, they just kind of tell your viewership that you're old, so they don't, like because I used to do it, and the social media influencers that I worked with were like, yeah, let's not do that. At least on my video, they'd always be like, on my videos, let's not do that. And so we kind of learned not to do that because it screams old media. I do it in the super sources. I mean, because it was requested, and also because I got plenty of room to put it in there. I've got 2 windows, and so there's plenty of room to put things in there. Might as well fill it up with some branding. So that doesn't bother me as much. I also have an issue with the fact that we're cutting to things on the counters, people cutting, and the graphics. You just don't know whether the graphics are going to sit over top of something someone wants to see. So I feel like with the amount of super source that we're using, that we're branding it well enough. It's not like we need to brand every single second. You know what you're watching. You went to the webpage, so I think that and then again, the other thing that we kind of learned with social media was that every time you put a brand up somewhere, there's bubbles and all kinds of other things that are going over top of it. So unless you're really ready to organize all of that, it's not worth putting up too much. You do put up enough just to tell people what they want to know, but we try to stay out of tons of it. So anyway, that's the thought process that I have as I put it in. I don't know what, since I'm the one putting up the graphics, I get sent a bunch of graphics, and then I just use the ones that are.
That was huge, Alex. That was brilliant, because that was a question that I was very curious about. And I'm, again, like I said, I'm building this roller coaster as we're writing it. So thank you.
So I get a bunch of requests. I get a bunch of things in a list of requests, and then because I'm the TD, I tend to just do the ones that are, and part of it is also there's just a lot of complexities with the way we're doing the super sources and how often we're using them that makes using downstream keys right now, until I get better at it, until I organize it better, it's hard to do those as well, just and stay up and keep up with everything. So I'm, but again, I might do more lower thirds at some point, but it would only be just to ID somebody at the very beginning, so you knew who they were. But I wouldn't do very much of it, because again, we get a negative feedback I've gotten from social influencers that we've worked with, and I try to keep up with the kids as best I can.
Do you want to talk about the colors as well with regards to the compression, or is that a different conversation?
No, we can talk about it. I mean, we're going to push the colors a little bit cooler. I think over this either this show or the next show, depending on when I get graphics. So it'll be the same graphics if I don't have them today, or it'll be new ones. But
you'll have them today.
Okay.
There you go.
So, but we're going to cooler graphics. There's 2 reasons for it. One is that, red doesn't compress as well. And some of the designs, just don't compress as well from a technical perspective, as well as that I feel that cool colors tend to push people's color, their skin color forward a little bit. So darker colors that are, darker backgrounds with cooler colors tend to make the video look better. So for those reasons, we're going to experiment a little bit with the color scheme and go a little cooler on those graphics. So we'll see how
you just saved me like 3 hours of email. That's awesome. Thank you.
There we go. Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Paul Valus of Austin, Texas says, how would I rig up this kitchen with lights, cameras, and sound? And he has a link there, I'm presuming, to a kitchen.
Yeah, it'd probably be hard for us to do this in real time, but what I would highly recommend is bringing this up in where we really have been talking about these. It's really cool. The Polycam is really cool. I would probably, we'll spend more time on it in the pre-show. We've been kind of looking at a lot of these in the pre-show to discuss them. The first thing I would do, I mean, if you really decide you're serious about wanting to put lights and cameras and sound in there, or lights and cameras, the first thing I would do is say put a grid in the ceiling if you're allowed to. So if you can put and I would just put hang points that I could put a grid up when I want and take it down when I don't need it. But in kitchens, I mean, I just grids are, you know, like lighting everything from the floor is really, really painful. You know, in a kitchen, because you're moving around and everything else, it's just really hard to do. Go ahead, Paul.
Who makes the grid and where do you get it, or do you
You make
DIY it?
Well, so a lot of us are using, I mean, you can get into a lot of different things. The grids that I make are usually using what's called speed rail. And I tend to use Hollander connectors, Hollander attachments with speed rail. And you can decide what size speed rail. That's a whole nother, we could probably do a whole second hour on speed rail, but I use speed rail for it. It's not that the attachments are not the cheapest. The speed rail is cheap. The attachments to connect all the speed rail is expensive. It's crazy expensive, but there's a lot of other ways to do it. There's poles and there's other things like that, but eventually you'll just want a grid. Like a grid that's like 2 foot by 2 foot or 3 foot by 3 foot. It just fixes everything. Next question.
Coming in from A. Mitchells in Washington, and A. Mitchells says, so what is the best way to fix Chris Fenwick's cable modem and internet speed problem? We talked about this during the pre-show a good bit.
Chris, what is your internet problem? What are you having trouble with? Well, sit on the couch. There's got to be a couch somewhere for Chris to sit down on.
It's probably too late to get into this because I'm going to have to run an errand here pretty quick.
You have highly fluctuating internet connection.
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah. And I'm using a Comcast modem, and everybody says, "Oh, get rid of that and get a different." That's the first thing we
all do.
But part of what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing, and this is just general troubleshooting. Let's not talk about the internet. Let's talk about troubleshooting. So I say my internet isn't good, and when you say that, you get a whole bunch of responses. Change this thing, do this, call this guy, do whatever. And really quickly, all of a sudden, it's like a shotgun where you've hit, a target, pellets have hit this giant thing. And I find that super frustrating because it worked. And then 2 hours later, it didn't work well. And my real question is, why is it changing? And the response is, "Oh, we'll go buy all this stuff." And I really just want to know why it's changing.
It's buying one thing is the thing that we're all telling you to do, which is that we all know anybody who does any kind of real work with a Comcast connection knows get rid of that modem. That modem is the devil. Anyway, JJ. Like there's nothing else there's no other conversation until you get rid of the Comcast modem. There's no conversation to have about the bandwidth because they have so much control over that bandwidth and they are managing it for their own good with that modem, and you're providing your bandwidth to everyone around you because of the way that they set up their little thing. And so there's a whole bunch of
that's a good data point what you just said there, because that's something that nobody said is that by changing this modem.
You cut them off from all that Wi-Fi.
I can take control over my pipe is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Nobody said that
before.
Go
JJ.
To some degree. The carriers all use an over-subscription model for a standard plain Jane home connection, which is likely what you have. Or I think you do have that. Unless you have a business connection, then you have an SLA. The service level agreement is what they're required to, by contract, provide you as a business-to-business service. So until you have a business connection, there's very little that you can do. Yeah, there's very little that I've used one for forever, that you can do to actually guarantee that speed. Otherwise, they're using a 10 to 1 or 12 to 1 subscription model. And to Alex's point, nowadays what's been true is all the carriers are trying to worry about the 5G complaint that's going to continue to grow. And all the carriers are trying to say our general Wi-Fi is better than everyone else. Wherever you go, I can always connect to Xfinity or I can connect to AT&T everywhere. They're trying to spread that out so that you can use a wireless version everywhere. Unfortunately, that means they're provisioning those same speeds out into large areas, and every time they provision that, even to a business connection, they'll have a public access point at your facility that is off the local CO, the central office that distributes that connectivity to your area. So, unless you get a business connection that guarantees a speed, the distribution of services that you should have inside your own building, which is the additional answers of separating your modem from your router, from your switch, from your wireless, all those, separate those out so they each do their own job. You wouldn't normally buy a color switcher to do your sound. Similarly, you don't want to get a modem to do your routing. So to a definitive answer is get a business connection where you have an SLA that you can actually take to your sales guy and say, look, my service level agreement says this at all times. So you're not sharing it when the kids come home from school, which nowadays they're doing again at 3 o'clock, and all of a sudden your bandwidth goes from 500 down to 200 because the kids have come home and they're all logging in. They're all using the internet that's provisioned to your area. Until you get the SLA, not much you can do.
And also to note that they're sniffing your bits and they're doing packet shaping. So the other thing is that a little discovery I made yesterday, I had to download a bunch of big files, or Monday, was that I was downloading through my VPN in my office at 10 megabytes a second. So it was, 100 megabits a second or whatever, but I have a 1 gig connection here at the house. So what I did is I went around my VPN. So I was like, I'll get it much faster from my home connection. Got half that speed, half the speed that I was getting through my VPN to my office, because my office is a business AT&T connection and it's not being packet sniffed. And my Comcast is sniffing those packets and going, he's doing a big download. We're going to slow it down. As soon as I switched back to the VPN, went right back up again. And so the thing is that, and it was at the maximum that my VPN connection is maxed out at 100 megs. So that's the only reason that it did that. But the point is that it definitely was affected by going back through the Comcast connection rather than using my, definitely there's a bunch of pieces there that, and a home connection, you're kind of,
that's QoS. That's exactly.
And this is the thing that you said to buy, Alex?
I have a surfboard. Yeah. That's what I use. So,
sorry. I'll put it back up.
Yep. That's the one that I have. And it has worked good for me. Well for me. So go ahead, Aaron, and then Jeffrey, and then Paul, real quick. We stuffed on this one.
Yep. I just want to say, gather data. That's the other thing. Run speed tests to several different speed test services. You need to understand they need to understand what you mean by my internet's bad. And that's always a good way to fight it a little bit. Mm-hmm. You're oversubscribed probably to 128 different people near you. And somebody else is using the bandwidth before you are, but you don't have any control of that regardless of your equipment, right? So your best defense is getting a lot of data to pound them with and say, this is what I mean by bad over time, different parts of the day. You'll never get a gigabit from a cable modem. You're provisioned for a gigabit, but you're always so oversubscribed and so QoS'd that you'll never get it.
Well, the other thing is that just know that right now I've never seen so much competition in the bandwidth world, and you definitely want to research business connections, because our business connection, I have a 1 gig business connection from AT&T, symmetrical for $140 in San Rafael, $140 a month.
That's what I have at my house too.
It's there's a huge arms war going on because of Elon Musk, because of 5G, because of all these things. There's a lot of push of everyone trying to make sure that people keep using their connections. So it's a good time to do research. This is a great time to, negotiate. Jeffrey, and then Paul, real quick, 10 seconds.
One thing you got to understand is you are in an apartment complex, and sometimes, I don't know Comcast that well, but sometimes Comcast will stop right at the beginning of that, and the rest is all by the business manager. The better thing to do is, if you absolutely need that internet speed, buy yourself a second internet provider, because then you can bounce between the two if you need to, and keep your business going.
Good, Paul.
Alex and JJ aren't going to like this answer, but I do like the Netgear cable modem. I asked the guys that are out in the field, the Spectrum techs, they all say the best modems they see in the field are these Netgear Nighthawk C7800s.
But they work for Spectrum.
2 gigabit cable modems.
Sorry.
All in one. I know you don't like all in one, Alex.
No. As someone who just works on who tests people's connections, the worst service provider in all of the United States is Spectrum. It is when we see Spectrum when someone fills out Spectrum on the thing, we know that we probably will have problems. All right, next question.
Alton Christensen of Brooklyn, New York says there has been a lot of chatter about Cinemaker production the Cinemaker production platform here. What about AirMix from Teradek? AirMix is a bit more pro. It seems like it might be more stable given the wireless experience of Teradek. Any thoughts? And he's got links there.
It's pretty hard for us to kind of, when you put links in, just so you know, we'll almost always just jump over those. Don't even bother to put links in the thing. We can't manage that during the Q&A. We can answer AirMix, but don't bother to put URLs in the questions because we can't process them that fast. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've been using both. And in fact, my son's school has been using them. This is him doing high school sports, and with great success on the Teradek AirMix platform. Like, they've been completely stable for 2.5 hour, 3 hour volleyball, football, soccer games. On the Cinemaker platform, you're really talking about two things. That what I think we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode is Cinemaker Meeting Director, which is the new Zoom one that runs on a Mac. So the other one that you've heard of is Cinemaker for the iPad. And one of the things when you talk about Pro, this is Panasonic's iPad control for their PTZ cameras. It is Cinemaker's OEM'd. So when you talk about Pro, Panasonic bought Cinemaker's technologies to put in this app that's like $100. So it's definitely not a joke. I mean, like, this is the real deal stuff. And the other cool thing is these guys have optional hardware that you can get. So you can put HDMI cameras with a Kilo viewer with this kind of generic Ethernet adapter. And then they also do have the USB-C to Lightning. So if you want to stabilize out these connections, you can go Lightning to Ethernet, and you can go USB-C to Ethernet to stabilize things out.
That's great. John?
I use them both. What I really like is the new instance of Cinemaker Director, which integrates Zoom, and they've sort of made it light your weight, so it's not as hard to use. The other thing I like about the Cinemaker iPad is that you can shoot and stream your show, but at the end of the show, you push one button and it sends the whole thing as a Final Cut Pro edit list. And
That's
so
great.
then you could recut it. The only thing it doesn't do is if you're using green screen in your stream, you have to re-green screen it when you go to Final Cut Pro. But it literally, we did a live stream. At the end of the stream, edited it all over, had an editor, and we had a full resolution version edited before we even got it up on YouTube again.
That's great. Next question.
John Foltz in Sellons Grove, Pennsylvania says, I've been using Lucid Chart for workflow diagrams. I like it better than OmniGraffle. Any thoughts or alternatives?
I believe isn't Here to Record, aren't they building something that lets you chart out video? I think that's happening there, but yeah. So I haven't played with Lucid Chart that much. I've been using OmniGraffle for so long that it would be hard for me to change. I don't know if anybody has any other experience of what they use to graph things out. Oh, sorry. But Lucid Chart is something that we should probably take a closer look at because it's cross-platform, I believe. Next question.
Tommy Shantz is back with from St. Paul. I'll show of hands for the folks that use vMix, and why did you choose that program?
Go ahead, Guy.
It's awesome. It's really stable. That's the thing, is it's just been banged on so hard by so many people that it came out of the church industry, and they started giving away this trial version, and it's just grown legs like you wouldn't believe. But the biggest thing, I think, is the stability. I think there's a lot of Mac people that are actually buying PCs, me included. I bought this PC. I wasn't a PC person, but I bought it to run vMix, and it's been extremely stable. And the power, like when you see what Greg Gibson's doing with these boxes that can do these moves. I don't think I have one set up. Well, yeah, I do. These merge techniques. No, actually, I don't have one set up. But basically, there's just a lot of power that you would get in a TriCaster with replay, records, that kind of thing. And it starts at $60. So you can do the free trial for 60 days, and then you can step up. It goes all the way up to, I think it's about $1,000 for the 4K version. So it will do 4K. The thing is, you need a GPU-based NVIDIA card to really make it sing. Otherwise, without that optimized performance mode enabled, it's kind of a dog. So I've tried putting it on laptops with no graphics card, and it's not any fun. And the other big thing is it'll push 1080p to Facebook, which is a big deal via the API if you go that route. Otherwise, you're going to get 720p to Facebook. So that's one of the reasons why I really like it.
Go ahead, Edwin.
I started off with Wirecast, and it was the buggiest thing I'd ever used in a production company. And then subsequently went to OBS thinking like this open source thing would be great. Wirecast has been just a huge success in just workflow and stability.
vMix, or is it vMix or Wirecast? Yeah.
vMix. vMix has been just incredible. So I would like get a PC and really learn it.
Next question.
Ari Block is back from Tel Aviv, and he says, what is your data backup and DRP strategy? What tools, services, or platforms do you use specifically for desktop, not server backups?
I admit that I'm still pretty old school, where I'm still backing a lot of stuff up. When I'm backing up to what I would call offline, I'm copying them to spinning drives, that are available, and these are usually I use what we call toasters that look like this, that you can you can insert the drive, in here, and we just take the raw drives. We get cases that make them look like tapes. We put everything on them, and then we scan them. And I think it's called CD scanner, or it basically just scans all the directories. And it basically then I give them a number and put them on the shelf. At one point, we probably had 1,500 to 2,000 of them, that were there. And then part of the process is you have somebody spinning them up every day, a certain group of them at certain ages, to make sure that they're still alive. But we could find anything that we had done in 10 years in 15 minutes, and so and we. Actually, the hardest part was getting rid of them when we had to destroy them all when I closed my company. They never went. We had never had a drive go bad. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So coming from IT, I dealt with a lot of LTO tape backups, and so what I normally do with my backup is I have two different sets of drives. I have my main Drobo, which is going to be an overall catch of the files. But then I have a tape, and I'm trying to remember the name of the acronym, but it's just basically a removable drive that I can switch between last year and this year, and then I can do a first backup there, and then a second backup on that one. That way, if one of those errors out, then the other one has protected it.
And to be clear, everything's in two different drives, and generally in two different physical locations. So go ahead, Mickey.
What I use here and also in the studio is Synology has what they call hyper backup, which essentially allows you to mirror one Synology NAS to another. So my business Synology NAS is mirrored to one that's here, and my personal one that's here is also mirrored to another one that's in the studio. So, and it does it automatically. With their own login system. No need to open up firewalls or set up a VPN.
Go ahead, JJ.
So what I've used in the past is sync things. It's actually really nice to have multiple locations. You sync between three physical locations, and often, if you can, different fault lines. Mm-hmm. So different fault lines in here in California, we have to worry about that. So we'll have one in Sacramento. And then for desktops again, so you can spin up a virtual desktop someplace or have an actual desktop, and then just sync things for the things that are necessary, and that makes it it's a low bandwidth utilization synchronization tool that you can have multiple backups at different locations. Also, it's helpful to have a batch file set up just to copy over the changes in a day, so you're not syncing everything over, but just the particular things that have been changed in the day of your work.
That's great. Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis here on the panel often says, the past few days, my Companion app is not connecting to my Atem software control. Companion just says connecting and sits there and never seems to connect. I've completely rebooted and still no luck. I even updated Companion to the new version. Any suggestions or ideas?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Start by rebooting your router and see if an IP address, an errant IP address, is trying to take over your IP address for your source.
Yeah, and we hope to have some folks on from Companion soon, so we might be able to ask that question more directly. All right, next question.
Tyler Darlington here in San Diego says, any ideas on how to use an Xbox controller to control pan tilt zoom cameras in an Atem? I have all the right equipment, just looking to use a game controller with an Atem.
Oh man, it's a tough question. I don't know if anybody's tried to take an Xbox controller to control a camera. I will tell you that Xbox players are really good at PTZ. we definitely I would like to figure that out, but they usually is when we give them the PTZ controller, they do much better than most of our camera operators. But go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I actually do use an Xbox controller, but I don't do the Atem part of it. I work with Jeff Keithley, and I run remote cameras for him on some of his tennis gigs. But he uses.
How are you controlling it?
It's with Mark Roberts software, and that's a higher end camera and higher end software, and we VPN to each other, so I can be in Fort Wayne, the tennis can be in Delray Beach, Florida, and he can be in Texas, and we're doing it all through the interwebs.
There you go, Jeffrey. And then Guy.
Depending on your PTZ camera, I know PTZ Optics, for example, has a software that you can download and install, and then you can hook up your Xbox onto that or your controller onto that, and then use that. But other ones might not have that option.
Next question.
Carmi Vanzerwick in Redondo Beach, Florida is up next with, how comparable are Mimo and vMix? Given a choice, would people pick one over the other? And would you prefer to be on Mac OS, but if vMix is much better, he or she, I can't tell, would be prefer to be on vMix, but if prefer to be on Mac OS, but if vMix is much better, they deal with the switch. Sorry, I messed that up.
So I think that the actual feature set between the two are pretty close. The interface is very different. So Mimo Live is definitely not looking at the past of how things look and running with it. And so I think that I don't know. I mean, as I've used both of them, and I find that Mimo Live took me a long time to get my head around. I mean, poor Oliver spent a decade, it feels like a decade, trying to get me to use it. And then once I got used to it, I was like, oh, this is great. And I find that interface is pretty easy for the kinds of events I use it for. I think that vMix probably does have more features overall than Mimo. I feel like their feature set isn't that much different, but and vMix will feel much more traditional. If you're used to something like that. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, we're a reseller for both, and so take my stuff with a grain of salt, but we sell a lot more Mimo Live. It's because we do this thing called the One Button Studio, so that's the reason. But given a choice, I would probably go with vMix because of the cloud stuff and being able to future-proof your knowledge, being able to do multiple instances. So I'm running multiple instances of vMix as well as Livestream Studio. So that's another one to throw into the loop is Livestream Studio. So 3 to really look at and make a decision on.
I will say that having used vMix and Livestream Studio and used Livestream Studio in shows, I would use vMix. so it's Livestream Studio has a lot of things that says it can do, but we've had issues where it just drops connections, remote connections with no reason.
I wouldn't use it for the remote guest option, but if you don't use it for that, I mean, Jeff Keithley's using it for big time sports stuff. I mean, it's pretty amazing. As long as you're just cutting cameras and adding graphics.
Yeah, as long as you're not doing anything with
you just got hit in the arrow in the back.
Oh man, like right between the shoulder blades a couple times, and so like the big Avatar arrows. Yeah, so I'm kind of like that's the part that really kind of felt little pressure on the front of my chest that went so deep. So anyway, I think that Livestream Studios for me is hard, and I know from fairly good sources a little bit of a spaghetti code. All right, next question.
Thomas Bauer in Atlanta, Georgia says, is there a better value than a Decimator 12G Cross at $500 or so to convert HDMI signals from 4K HDR to 1080p SDR to go into an Atem Mini?
4K HDR to 1080p SDR. I didn't even know the Cross did that. Does the Cross will so that's a thing. Like, just to be clear, like, as someone who does a lot of HDR, going from like a little box going from HDR to SDR means that it has to do a transform. So I guess my question is if that cross is doing that, does it allow you to load a LUT? Because you're going to have a controlled landing between the HDR and the SDR, and that's tone mapping. That's a bunch of things. I'm not clear that the cross does. I didn't know that the cross did that. I'm kind of curious now to take a look at it. We use AJA FS HDRs to make that adjustment. We don't do it in a little box. So number one is I don't know. At $500, it's a pretty good deal to do that conversion. The one that's probably the best HDR to SDR is the BCom. They're out of France. And it's like a little tiny little box that'll go from HDR to SDR. I don't know if it'll do the up-down cross, but it'll convert the color spaces. But I think it's, thousands of dollars. I don't think it's a hundreds of dollars kind of thing. Next question.
Aaron Husich of Durham, North Carolina says, what tools do people use for making show rundowns?
Rundown Creator. That's a really popular one.
Good name.
Yeah, Rundown Creator is one that we've used. We just used recently, actually. Go ahead, Doug.
A simple one is just Google Sheets. It's real simple, and everybody can share it.
I will say that most of our rundowns are done. They originate in numbers, and then they're brought into Google Sheets so people can share it. I don't create anything new in Google Sheets because it requires too much swearing. So but numbers is a nice, easy way to get it done quickly, and then you can cut and paste it in or export it out as XLS and then bring it in, and then you can make it. But once everything's structured, people can all adjust it. But until we get to a point where people need to do it, we do it in numbers because numbers is so much more fluid than everything else. I mean, it's just like, for those of you who have a Mac and not using numbers, you're crazy. It is so much faster and so much easier to use than Excel and Sheets. All right, next question.
Sky Gleason here on the panel from Seattle says, a master at live show calling. Why is watching this behind the scenes so much fun? And he's got a link to a dig story that has the switching of the 1997 Academy Awards. And it looks like it's going to be fun. So I'm stealing the link. I want to watch that.
Yeah, we'll watch the link later. It's too hard for us to reference external stuff during the show. Next question.
Moving on to Trevor New at Beacon, New York. What's a good resource for finding and discovering audio hardware and software? I'm currently using CleanFeed to run orchestral performances with up to 50 virtual people so far. Is there a better option for large groups besides CleanFeed? And it has a link.
Well, at the money, there might be better options. I mean, I think CleanFeed's a pretty good setup. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, just options for good resources. I would say maybe check out Gearspace, formerly Gearsluts. Also check out Sound on Sound, very good resource, and also Production Experts.
And the can you put those links in Makana, Mickey? And
sure thing.
Somebody can. And then for remote records, you may also want to look at Riverside FM. I know that some folks here at Riverside.fm, I know that some folks here are using it a fair bit. And so that we're testing that as we speak. Or this week. So Riverside is another one. And I think they just rolled out an iPhone solution for what they're doing. So that does local record and then uploads backlinks. And it's a fair bit less expensive than CleanFeed. Next question.
Carmi Vanzervik is back from Redondo Beach with Cinemaker generates Final Cut Pro 10 lists, Mini ISO generates Resolve projects. How much needs to be done from these projects to turn everything into one final project?
Well, we're going to bring those guys on and we'll talk about it. Let's have them on for a second hour, and then we'll chat with them about it and let you ask directly. Next question.
Edwin Ruiz of Chicago. I am purchasing a preamp for my Zoom F8 and Electro Voice RE20. Cloud Lifter or DM1 Dynamite, pluses, minuses, or same.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm curious, Edwin, like for what purpose would this be? If it's for something like, just using the RE20 as a microphone for Zoom, I would recommend consider purchasing something like a Shure X2U, a completely different interface that has better preamps. because if you do go with getting a cloud lifter, you would still be running through the circuitry of the F8, which is, not as good as others.
I know you don't like it. It's what I have, and I have a few podcasts that require 3 people to be super spread out, and I have 3 of these microphones. So I as much as I want to buy more stuff, I'm trying to make use of what I have. So
I'm just surprised that the RE20 doesn't have enough oomph to go in. I mean, it's not. Is it?
It does. It's just I'm turned up all the way on the. So I want to bring that.
You're getting a lot of self noise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now go ahead, Bill.
Wouldn't it be more sensible just to find a good used Mackie 1202 or something and do the microphones in there, use its preamps, which are decent, not fabulous, and then you have a solid signal coming out of that that'll feed anything.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, I like going with that Mackie route. I don't know if you would be able to get ISOs out of that into the recorder. So between the two, I have no experience with the DM1, the Dynamite. Actually, this is the first time I'm hearing of it. But I do know that I've used the Cloud Lifter in the past, and also I do know a lot of people are happy with it. So I think that's what I would consider above.
Cloud Lifter is probably the most popular in that class. As far as going through that, people I've talked to, that's what most people are using. Next question.
Mike Burns in Spokane, when using remote audio programs like SoundSource, would the 2015 MacBook Air do the job? We have Comcast business class speeds with an Aris surfboard and a Griffin mesh. What VPNs do you like?
There's a whole bunch of things to unpack in that question. Fortunately, we have time. We have just enough questions to get to the bottom of the hour. So we can talk about it a little bit. VPNs can sometimes make your connections a little less, actually less stable as far as those things go. So you just have to kind of watch that. Mesh, when anyone says mesh anywhere near anything real time, I just warn you that that's a world of hurt. So a mesh network is not something you want to be attached to if you can avoid it. Go ahead, JJ.
So let's just address the VPN question or part of that. So any VPN you get, the average MTU, the minimum transmission unit size of a packet leaving your building is 1500 in size. That has a overhead above it that's usually 10% overhead. A VPN, when used, will increase that overhead size. So your normal packet transmission length is increased, thus your overall speeds will be decreased. So when we talk about VPNs, it's really good to have complete control of your VPN versus using a cloud type VPN. I use Radmin VPN because it's free. But if you have the resources, get something like either the Meraki's or FortiGate solutions. They have the FortiClient solution that allows multiple devices to connect to a centralized VPN location, but realize that your bandwidth will be reduced because that header increases in size to encapsulate your information inside of it.
And I think that I find that I view software VPNs as something you do when you want to hide your IP. If you actually want solid transmission, I feel like you really need to set up a hardware VPN. Is the thing that you need to do. So you need to have hardware that's capable of it. Again, the ones that we've used the most, and there's a lot of them, but the ones that we've used the most are Meraki and Ubiquiti. Another one that I've been introduced to recently is pfSense, which is something that I haven't used in the past, but we're using for another facility. But those are all other options. But you'll need some kind of piece of hardware that you can log into to make that work. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, regarding running something like SoundSource on a lighter machine like a MacBook Air, a 2015 MacBook Air, it would definitely be able to get the job done. I mean, like I've only for routing and recording though, not processing. Processing would depend on exactly what you're trying to do. But like back then, like I was running 64 channels in and out for on a 2008 MacBook Pro back like Core 2 Duo.
Right.
So like
audio is so tiny. Like it's just so cute. Compared to video, as far as transmission goes, you can
exactly.
You can usually get a lot.
And regarding like Comcast biz class speed, that doesn't really tell us much. It just tells us that it is a business account, which, as JJ mentioned earlier, guarantees you a certain level of service, but it doesn't say anything about the actual connection speed. It could be a business account, but it's 2 megs up, 2 megs down.
Yeah, go ahead, JJ, and then Sky.
The other thing you're going to lose because you're using a VPN is the layer 2. So any multicast protocols, they're gone because it has to route. And because you're routing, anything that you expect to just work because it's on the same network, it's not actually. So multicasting protocols, layer 2 protocols will disappear. That's just more.
Yeah, good, Sky.
And when you're talking to your accounting department, they don't understand why you need that big fat pipe, because they're shoving around Excel files and Word docs. So can you talk about the physical weight of these files that we're shoving through these tiny straws?
They're not. Again, audio is not that from a
audio,
video perspective, but that's all we're doing here. Is the question is
Okay.
related to audio, so
Copy that.
it's not a big problem. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's not very heavy, but it can get computationally expensive inside your box because 48 kilohertz signals to mix and mosh them requires more sometimes weight than just pixels.
Yeah.
But I'm agreeing 100% that if you can do video storage and processing well, audio should be an insignificant weight on top of that.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, in terms of bandwidth, like raw 24-bit 48 kilohertz wave files, 2 channels of them would be around roughly a gig an hour. So it's extremely light.
Yeah. Next question.
Brant Kruger, of Minneapolis says, I have a client looking for an ultra lightweight online event platform. No chat, no Q&A, basically just a branded wrapper around a private live stream. So not YouTube or Facebook. Any panel recommendations?
Vimeo or Zoom. Have people do a Zoom webinar. You can just turn off all the chat and everything else. That's a pretty easy one, or Vimeo. But I think those are probably the two best platforms to do that if you want a clear label system to manage those. I don't know. I will say I don't know why you would do that. Let me say, I know that it's because your client asked, but a lot of times, at least and I'm sure that knowing Brant, I know that you're probably having this conversation, or you've already had the conversation. But for everybody else, without interactivity, just make a video. Don't bother with the whole just make a video, because people like me would rather, if you're not going to let me interact, I would rather watch it at 2x, because get to the point, move forward. If I can't keep up, I'll slow down. But watching somebody talk to me about something at 1x that I can't interact with, I just stop. I just won't do it anymore. I need, if you're going to give me a presentation at 1x, then I better be able to interact, with it. But if I'm not able, if there's no chat, no way to interact with other people about it or do something about it, I'm not interested in interacting. The reason we watch the keynote is because we were all talking about it amongst ourselves. So that makes it interesting again. But I wouldn't watch it if we weren't watching it together, I'd watch the Apple keynote. I just wait for the highlight reel. I wouldn't even bother with the regular bit. Bill, and then Jeffrey.
I had into my mind when I read this. I did once the worst CEO presentation I have ever seen, and certainly the client will be nameless. And most of the CEOs I worked with have been really fine people. They're really driven, but they're really fine people. This guy was terrible, and I can see them wanting to say, "Here's the message from the boss," and turn off everything. Don't let anybody comment.
But again, if it's without interactivity, I just don't know why anyone does that anymore. Without any chat, it's like a complete. But anyway, if you're going to do it, the Zoom webinar and Vimeo are probably good platforms. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
You can also do a Discord or Slack for that matter. But
if you're not doing interactivity, I don't think that you're forward thinking in the level of even knowing what Discord is. Like, if the person asking for no chat on a live stream, I would be surprised if they knew that Discord existed. Sorry. So I know that we're playing pretty rough there, but that's. Yeah. Anyway, last question for the first hour.
Carmi, Vanswag says, Vansifake. I have trouble with that. I'm sorry, Carmi. Why use Google Sheets versus the numbers for sharing stuff?
Because I love Apple, as you know.
I'm a big fan of a lot of things they do. I think Numbers is great. I love Pages and I love Keynote. So I love all the apps. The sharing tools within those apps are an unmitigated disaster. Like it is like they did not get that right. I know that it's complicated, but the amount of times we have people not being able to log in and not being able to figure it out, and then they have permission, then they don't have permission, then they, did it actually update? Like the whole handshake that Apple's doing. And I think it has to do with the weighing between privacy and control and all the things that Apple has to manage inside of that. So I don't blame them. I know that the what they're trying to do is super complicated. It just isn't working. Like, so we try. I was super excited. I had been requesting that feature for 15 years when it came out. Every time I talked to someone that was remotely connected to it, I was like, I need to be able to share all this stuff. And the one feature that does work is the Keynote Live. So being able to share a Keynote Live where someone else can make it work, that works amazingly well. And if you're having people do presentations remotely and you want to have like a local connection and have it look great and have the animations and have everything else, Felipe doesn't agree completely, but I've had that be super successful as far as that interaction goes. Maybe I've just had good connections and good luck. So that's been really good for me. But everything else that has to do with sharing has just been really, really rough. And so we just gave up and went back to cutting and pasting things into Google Docs, or into Sheets, because especially for Numbers, we don't, again, as I said, we don't originate things in Sheets because it requires too much swearing. Go ahead, Felipe.
Yeah, I was going to say that the only thing about Keynote Live is that it doesn't support custom fonts. So I've tried custom fonts, for example. Yeah. Oh. So for example, for our presentation, we tried to use Keynote Live in the past, but we would lose our fonts there.
And the reason I probably wouldn't notice that is that I use so little text that I usually stick with really, really basic font. Like I'm known for using Helvetica a lot, cause I'm just like, well, there's only going to be 3 words in the whole presentation. So it's, I use very little text. So I'm like really not very much because I usually talk over everything.
There's so many Helveticas.
Helvetica new. Yeah, exactly. That's my because there's a huge difference between a huge jump from Helvetica to Helvetica new. I mean, it was like night and day. It's like anyway. So, Felipe, that's a good one. I didn't know that'll be something I'll keep my eye open for in that process. Yeah, interesting. Next question.
We had another question come in. Yeah, Mark Harner in Seattle, Washington says, is there a PC or laptop in the $1,000 US price range that can run vMix well? If so, any recommendations? And this person is building a machine. It's not an option. Building a machine is not an option they're interested in. They want off the shelf.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
First of all, desktop over laptop always. You have more power off of that. Secondly, if you could put $500 more on that, you'll be good, because then you can get yourself either a Core i7 or an AMD Ryzen 7 or better machine with good RAM, with a good video card, and of course it'll have PCIe slots, so you'll be able to add a capture card into the machine rather than using the USB capture, which will make it a little bit more stable. And you can get 4-plex cards now, so you can do more cameras, but it really depends on what you're going to be using it for, how many inputs and outputs and stuff like that.
That's great. So now we're shifting gears. Is Stephen Moyer coming? Is he coming through your connection, Felipe, or is he? Okay, you're piping him through.
He's here in spirit.
He's here in spirit. Okay. You have it. Okay, great. So we're gonna kick this off. One note is that, of course, this is an HBO special about something that's relatively political, and I just want to kind of lay the ground rules here. Any pro or con political comments in Mukana will result in almost an immediate ejection. So it is not about the politics. It's not about the content. It's about how it was created. So just keep it tight. So that's my recommendation to everybody. I won't have very much understanding about it. And any really big comments, pro or con, I don't care which side, could lead to expulsion from Discord. So just be clear that I just want to keep it tight and just have a conversation about how it got done. All right. So Felipe, give us, and Stephen, hi, how's it going? It's good to see you.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So you're gonna have
Okay,
to
I hope you
explain
guys
this.
can
So
hear him
before we
well.
start, you have to explain what you're doing here. In our little, like, just give us like a 1 minute how you have Stephen coming in on the same one, just so we all, otherwise
I
people
thought this
wonder.
would be interesting for everyone here.
Yeah.
Stephen is in a separate call with me. I have a PC that's capturing his video and bringing it into an input on my Atem. And this is a macro using SuperSource. The presentation is on my computer going into another input on the Atem. And he is controlling the presentation as well through a remote desktop solution, Jump Desktop. And I'm controlling the presentation through my phone.
And Stephen, where are you?
Simple.
I'm in Los Angeles.
This is so meta. All right. So give us a little story of how you guys got involved and what the challenge was. And for those watching, go ahead and start asking questions as they go through it. We'll talk for probably the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll well, there may be more there, but we'll get to your questions by the bottom of the hour. Go ahead, Felipe.
All right. So for those who don't know me, I'm Felipe BAEZ. I was the lead assistant editor for Q Into the Storm. And Alex, again, thank you for the intro and for the ground rules there. That's very useful. With me here is Stephen Moyer. And Stephen has some disclaimers as well before we can continue. So Stephen, go ahead.
So, kind of building on what Alex had said earlier, considering the sensitive subject matter, it comes with some security considerations on our end. And so as we roll through this, know that because of that, it may change how we're able to answer some questions. We're going to do our best to answer as thoroughly as possible, but there may be some cases where we may have to give sort of a shorter answer because of that.
Well,
so this is where we would normally show the trailer, but
the thing is, we would show the trailer, but the trailer is from HBO, and we don't want this to be tagged later on and cause problems for Alex. So we're going to skip the trailer and go directly to the first question from Alex. Actually, that is the challenges. So I'm gonna get rid of Stephen here real quick, and the very first thing here is working remote. Right? This was not a small team. We had about 10 editors. 9 assistant editors, and we were dealing with about 1,700 hours of media. I'm gonna just let this number sink in for you guys there for a little moment. And of course, the first question that we had asked was, are we even able to do this? This many people, this much media, doing it remotely. So we have this set of challenges, right? Just to give you a backstory, the director was doing the whole research and filming everything for about 3 years. And when everything got finally settled with HBO, this was already the end of the second half of 2020. The very first time that an editor joined the team was in the beginning of October. And we were delivering everything by March this year. So just to give an idea of how fast-paced everything was. And now, we were dealing with unmanaged Macs. So everyone was using their personal computers at home. We had to support that, everyone with home internet. We had to find a way to track everyone's work and offer support for everyone. I am the very big tech person in the team, Stephen as well. So we were having those challenges. And just to remind you of those little numbers, 3 years, 70 terabytes of media that we had to, of course, replicate throughout many multiple copies, and 1,700 hours of footage. And of course, we already talked about this earlier here today. This was through home internet speeds in the United States. So about 200 megabits down, 10 megabits up, which is not great when you're having to deal with that much media. And of course, everything throughout 3 years was filmed in a multitude of cameras, cinema cameras, DSLR, smartphones, action cameras, a lot of screen recordings. And because of that, we had a lot of different formats. We had RAW, we have ProRes, we had MXF wrapped media, we had H.264, H.265, constant frame rate, variable frame rate, a lot of things to deal with. And for every single piece of interview or dailies, we used heavily multicam. So everything was put into a multicam. Now, Alex, I don't know how you want to continue with this. We had planned that we would go through the whole presentation, but also if it makes sense to interrupt us,
Why don't we, let's, if there's a good place for you to stop, we'll ask a couple questions and then we'll come back to the presentation. So is this a good place to take a couple questions?
In a couple of slides from now, because
just
a
let
lot
us
of
know
people
when.
might be interested.
Yep, go ahead
so
go ahead.
The main question here might be, of course, I said about 70 terabytes of media. Of course, we were not sending 70 terabytes of media to 19 people. So, of course, the way to go about that is to use a proxy workflow. Now, Final Cut Pro 10 has always had the ProRes proxy workflow, and that would be okay if it wouldn't be 11 terabytes of media that would generate for us. We wanted everyone to add it on SSDs to make everything as fast as possible for them. But because of the most recent update from Final Cut, at that time 10.4.9 and 10.4.10, we were able to actually use H.264s very easily as proxies. And that really helped a lot because it only used, 2.7 terabytes out of our 8 terabyte SSDs that we had. Together with that, you add the original sound, that was another 1.9 terabytes, and you're there at about half the amount of storage that we had available on that SSD. And then, of course, there is the whole part of transcoding. Kino was the application that we used for a few reasons. We could easily add metadata and send that metadata to Final Cut via XML. We could also transcode. We could do 16 transcodes at once on a Mac Pro with the biggest CPU that we could have. Of course, I think it's 24, 28 cores. And that meant that we were able to transcode 1,700 hours of footage in about 48 hours. So that was massive. I think here is a good moment to stop. And I just want to say that, of course, all of that we needed to replicate and set up the SSDs for everyone. The SSDs all had the same name and the same folder structure. So any questions that may be related to up to now of the presentation?
Well, I think we have a couple of general questions and we'll just see, and you can let us know if it's coming up in a little bit or whether you want to answer it right then. Go ahead, Bill.
The first one came in from Alex Goldner in London, and he said, how did you select the editors and assistant editors to work with on this?
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a question that is great to be answered by our director. And talking about that, we do have a few words from our director to come up later on. So maybe let's get that the whole creative part and management part of people, all of that. We have a few words from the director that we can share later on.
And did you build that staff or did the director build the staff for the editors?
The director built the staff.
Okay. And the one thing I will say before we move on to the next one is just as a note is this is why you want to be in a large community and learning how to do this stuff and people, being on the short list of making sure that works.
Yeah, it's very useful. And you're going to see that also knowing people that knows other people, that's how you end up getting work, right? Because I came into this project as a recommendation from a couple of other people.
Yep.
And
it's your network, and it's who you. It's generally not who you knew; it's who you've worked with that you recommend. And so that's the key is getting into those projects. Next question.
The next one may be in the same zone though. Who was responsible for the creative direction and consistency of the series, and how was that managed?
Yeah, that's a collaboration between director, executive producer, HBO as well. Stephen, do you have anything to add here? I'm pretty sure that Colin has something to add later on.
Yeah, I think since Colin addresses that one pretty specifically, we can save that one for later. It'll be a nice little treat.
Okay. Next question.
And then the last of that first group was you had a very fixed deadline. How did you make sure that you hit it?
Working like 24 hours a day.
Yeah, actually, we covered that. I mean, their staff is international. That's definitely a part of how this machine works. Just as a sneak peek, obviously, if I'm in LA and Felipe is in Prague,
and for once we ask him, we got to keep moving.
Oh, okay, all right, fair enough.
Right.
Carmi is back with. Did you consider Keyflow Pro as an alternative to Kino, and if so, why'd you pick one over the other?
Keyflow Pro was not a consideration because it needs a server to be running on. So it needs to have something that's always switched on. And as soon as you're talking about a lot of people remotely, you're talking about opening ports and everyone having to connect directly to that one machine that's in one specific place. Kino, on the other hand, when you're talking about recording the metadata, it records that metadata in hidden files in the same directory as the media. And that's very easy to create automations to copy that hidden file, that sidecar file, elsewhere and make everyone have that same file. And actually, it's a good segue. So maybe we can take a look at the next questions.
Let's keep moving
going forward.
Yep.
Okay. So about the data, we used PostLab Drive. Well, PostLab Drive basically is an offering from Hedge. It is block storage in the cloud and your access on your computer as a fuse mount. It works really well. Of course, if you wanted to do things directly from PostLab Drive, you would need solid internet because people did not have solid internet. PostLab Drive was the central place where we would add new media. So every day we would have new archive coming in, sometimes new dailies coming in. So we would put it in PostLab Drive. And then, of course, we would need to use another application to make sure that everyone has that locally. And we use ChronoSync for that. ChronoSync was doing verified copies from PostLab Drive to the local SSD automatically every hour for everyone. So the editors and assistant editors, they didn't need to worry about copying stuff to their SSDs. As long as it would hit PostLab Drive, then it would replicate to everyone's SSDs. And just for you to have an idea, this is more or less how it looks. Things get into PostLab Drive, ChronoSync grabs it, and then sends it to everyone's SSDs. And then, of course, Steven and I, and Michael Costello as well, we were connecting to people's computers all the time. This would be for answering questions because an editor just came in from Avid and is the first time on Final Cut, or maybe is a technical issue that we need to solve. And for that, we use Jump Desktop. Jump Desktop allowed us to have high frame rate, low latency, unattended access for the computers that we needed to have. And really, it was.
And why did you choose Jump Desktop over some of the other options? There's TeamViewer, and there is Parsec, and there's Teradici, and all these other ones. What had Jump? Why did you use Jump Desktop?
Well, Parsec is great, but as a host, it doesn't work on macOS. Mm-hmm. TeamViewer, honestly, personally, I find it a little bit clunky. The frame rate is not great to the point that sometimes I needed to take over the computer from an editor because it was already 3 a.m. for them, and I needed to finish something on Final Cut on their computer. So I needed to make sure that I had a high frame rate enough that I can see the video. I am able to hear the audio coming through. So it felt like I was just on my computer, really. Jump Desktop really has very good quality. And Parsec, for those who use Windows, is excellent as well. So, and Parsec it has a lower overhead than Jump Desktop as well.
Great. Let's go to the next. Okay. What do you got?
Continuing then. Cool.
Next
and of course, this all was only possible because we kept in communication all the time. The application that we were using to keep everyone in sync, our communication platform, we had a channel called AE Hotline, and there is where assistant editors would get in touch with editors would get in touch with assistant editors. So if they needed anything, they would just ping us there, and as soon as someone was available, that person would get to them. And then going to the part.
What's the link to AE? When you go to aehotline.com, it says it's like a secret site.
Oh,
like it doesn't.
Oh no, yeah, it's just a channel inside our communications platform. We're using an application with encrypted messaging and etc. And it was just a group chat called AE Hotline, basically.
Oh, right, yeah, absolutely.
So is that similar to a Discord or a Slack?
Yeah, similar to a Discord or Slack, but with a lot more stuff in between.
Yep. Go ahead.
And then, of course, in order for everyone to be able to access all the Final Cut libraries. Oh, by the way, this was edited all in Final Cut. I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning. And so it's 19 people using Final Cut. And PostLab is right in the middle, keeping all of the libraries of Final Cut there. So what PostLab does is, when I start editing on a library, it appears as locked for everyone else. So if you see the library as a bin, I'm bin locking. So everyone had their own library, and I'm going to give a little bit more details later on, but PostLab also keeps a list of all of the changes that were done throughout that library's life cycle. And it makes it possible for you to revert something to a previous version and basically keep a backup of everything that you're doing, and with a comment, which is very important. And then because of Final Cut 10.4.9 and 10.4.10, we had this little dialogue that really helped us throughout this whole thing. If it wouldn't be for these new features, it would have been a lot more difficult. And basically what this dialogue gives us is the option to, for example, transfer a project from one library to another. Now, all libraries had the same set of medias. If you transfer a project from one library to another, in the past, it would be very easy to duplicate media. But because now you have this option, event without media, you can copy the event, and whatever media is there, as long as it matches what is in the project, it gets linked. Now, this is not without any issues, but it was absolutely fantastic for us. And then on the subject of libraries, we had libraries that were called inboxes. So each person had their own library, and in the inbox is where we would put new media. And whenever new media would be available, we would let the editors know. They would open the inbox, a copy of it on PostLab, and bring in to their library. And you ask like what inboxes we had. For example, we had inboxes for new media, for archival, for selects, and for graphics. And in the end of the day, when a version of an edit was ready, the editor would export, send to Frame.io, get notes from the director and executive producers. So I see that there are more questions piling up. So let's take a look at what we have.
Bill. Leland Best from Corona, Michigan, and here on the panel often. What is the video bit rate that HBO was expecting or requiring for their production quality?
Stephen, I think you're going to be the best one answering that, as Stephen was the Conform editor.
Well, to be honest, I think because it's a documentary, it's a little bit more liberal. I know just because of the vast variety of acquisition formats, there was no way that we were going to be capturing at the highest bit rate, bit depth, or quality or resolution possible for everything that was captured. And then I think for the deliverables, that was, that fell on our vendor who was finishing. And so that was actually out of my hands. But that being said, and we'll touch on this later, we did a turnover that basically sent a ProRes 4x4 out to our vendor who does the finishing and the rest of the onlining there. Hopefully that answers that.
When you have a lot of mixed media, so you're exporting 4x4 and you have some of it, let's say, in raw data. When you export it out, do you end up sending that kind of mishmatch to them to let them, the colorist, have as much data as possible? Are you sending them log? Are you sending them the raw data? How do they manage that conform from the highest quality footage down to the lowest?
We will strip it down before creating the ProRes. Yeah, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later. But yes, we send over log, basically.
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Stuff, yeah.
Go ahead. Next question.
TJ Worrell in Minneapolis is kind of along the same lines. He's specifically interested in frame rates. What frame rate did you conform all the original assets to?
2398.
There you go. Next question.
Carl Marxer in New York says, who made the decision to edit with Final Cut Pro?
The editor.
That would be Cullen.
Oh, the editor, no, the director, sorry.
No, director.
Well, he's a little bit of both in this case, but yes, that was Cullen.
Yeah, actually, it's a great point. Cullen, he did a fair amount of editing before the editors started. So to give sense of the story and, of course, to pitch the story, to HBO, for example, he had to edit things. So all of that was already there on Final Cut.
Next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz in Chicago says, talking of the production, was there any use of transcription services? If so, how was it used with metadata?
Okay. Do you want to take this or should I?
I think the answer that we can give is that, remember, because of these security considerations, some transcription was used. Marrying it with metadata to the footage was not a part of this particular workflow because of other constraints. But that definitely is something that was on our radar and that we would have liked to have done and that we will probably be doing for future projects.
Next question.
Henry Ramos of Yonkers, New York says, would you consider moving some of the editing workflow into the cloud? Isn't that what we're kind of talking about?
Well, the problem with moving into the cloud is that if you consider that we're in a 24-hour work, people are working in New York, in Los Angeles, here in Prague, you need to make sure that everyone has very solid connection. If you don't have connection, then you're not working. That would be the problem with the cloud. And that would have been the problem with cloud in 2020, because people with their home internet connections at any given time, they could not have connection because everyone else around their block, their building is using, and it would suck. So having things offline for them as much as possible allowed them to be able to do this at any time. Cloud would have been tough for 2020.
Next
Actually,
question.
that leads right to the next one, which is Roscoe Jones here on the panel saying, editors tend to work 24/7 on deadline. Was there any forced downtime to service the system, or was it working full time to the very end?
Stephen.
I think what we can say is that there was eventually a point where there was forced downtime, but cylinders were all firing at once for everybody for, the
well, and that's one of the
majority
advantages again when you talk
show.
about getting out of the cloud, people can still be working on ideas and things even if there's a time when the cloud isn't available or when the transfers aren't available. Anyway, let's jump more into the presentation. This is great.
Yes, let's continue now. Well, now that's the part that Stephen comes in. So Stephen.
All right. So at this point, much of what Felipe has talked about basically covers everything outside of Final Cut, but also how to bring it in, not so much as what we're doing inside of Final Cut. A lot of that is implementing strategies for tracking things. So here's one example. This is a compound clip that represents a VFX shot. We had many VFX shots, not in the traditional sense. These are probably more considered animations of screenshots, to do with investigative material. So compound clip, first thing I do as a part of the strategy is to drop a chapter marker on it. This will act as a VFX ID. I'll name it. That'll go into a spreadsheet somewhere else with a description of what the scope of that VFX shot is. That scope will also go into a text layer that lives above the compound clip. This helps for getting data out of Final Cut later. But we basically make that text invisible. We just turn the opacity down. So it's just a nice little block that lives with the clip. We can call on it when we need it. So why are we using a compound clip here? Well, if you dive into it, the idea is that we have different iterations of the VFX. So temp VFX are being sent over to us for approval, and we want to be able to go backwards in time if we so need without creating a mess on the main timeline. So this is sort of like a time machine, essentially, for your VFX shot. This is also relevant because we will track the original plates and elements this way as well. And that was an important part of the legal aspect of things, getting that data out so that we can have it approved by lawyers later on, or accredited to whoever took a picture. And so that is how we track that sort of material. And then going on to library organization, we started out in a system that was basically one library per editor. This is because working on documentaries, you don't always know how the story is going to roll out. So you may have some sort of concept as to what might be episode 1, 2, and 3, but things change as information comes in and as story arcs are molded. So we started there and then eventually moved into a one library per episode model. Inside the libraries, it would be one event per interview. So that's where all the raw materials for the interview would go, as well as the multicams. And then we would use keywords to basically indicate ingest dates and IDs. What I mean by IDs is, if you remember back when Felipe was talking about inboxes and using inboxes as sort of a centralized repository for editors to take things as they please, well, they need a way to know what things are for them. So David Tillman, for example, is one of our editors. If I'm grabbing a group of clips for David, I will drop it into an inbox. I will tag it with today's date and his name so that he knows where to look. So this, moving on, is how our roles were set up. So we got, stock footage, archival footage, VFX shots, and then we have some corresponding audio roles for the same stuff, as well as VO, music, and effects. And just to see how that is splayed out in Final Cut, here is all of episode 1. And I'll punch in on this real quick. So remember, a lot of VFX shots. So all those chapter markers, all those orange dots spread across there are VFX shots that we have to track. So we got to be diligent about that. And then rolling down here, we have all the audio lanes. It looks quite nice and tidy. To be honest, it's nice working with roles. So moving on to finishing. This is sort of like my specialty. I was the Conform editor on this. So in this case, because we're working remote and because of the special circumstances that go into a project like this, we actually elected to go with a notched turnover, which is, as we all know, pretty old school way of doing things.
Can you explain
a
a notched turnover for people who aren't familiar?
Absolutely. So a notched turnover is the idea of, well, I'll go through the steps in just a second, but the idea is instead of handing over the raw assets, malleable assets from your edits to your colorist, you are instead creating a high-res, high-quality QuickTime of your locked cut with no color, no effects applied, and then you are notching it. So that is to say you are creating cut points, and you are handing over the QuickTime and the cut points via something like an EDL to the colorist so that they can color each cut or each clip individually. So how do you do that from Final Cut? So you start by divorcing picture from sound. So these become separate sequences. I will make one timeline for picture and then one for sound. And then in the picture sequence, I have to go back into all those compound clips just as a matter of professionality and break them apart. So the container goes away, all the unused iterations of the VFX go away, and we're just left with the proxy of the final VFX shot. Moving on, we then flatten. So in Final Cut, you can select a bunch of things and hit a shortcut that'll flatten, but it's not the best way to do things in a long form project. So I will go ahead and do this manually just to make sure that there are no blend modes being applied or things like opacity that I might miss that could screw something up down the line. And from here, we'll export the high-res QuickTime. Of course, at this point, we will have removed any LUTs, we'll have removed any sort of contextual color correction before this export happens. But this is full res, ProRes 4x4. We'll bring that ProRes back into the library. This is probably like a non-destructive copy of the sequence at this point. And I'll put that export above the edit. And in Final Cut, if you put that into a secondary storyline, which is kind of like the equivalent of a track in another NLE, and you select the clip and hit the up button. This is if you kind of have to do this in reverse in Final Cut. You start at the end of the timeline to make use of this trick. If you hit the up button, it'll take you to the last cut. And then you hit, go ahead, there we go. Command B, it'll make an incision point. And so I can just really quickly hit up, Command B, up, Command B, up, Command B, and I can notch an episode very quickly like this. There are automated ways of notching your QuickTime, but this gives me an opportunity to QC again and to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And it helps me make sure that I'm familiar enough with the episode before we start taking on other parts of the turnover. Then we'll basically wipe out the edits underneath this notched QuickTime. And what you're left with is that and the VFX and anything else that may have been in those container clips that need to be referenced over by our colors. So the VFX shots of proxies, a VFX vendor will send our finishing vendor the high-res material. So the finishing vendor will take our QuickTime and the VFX proxies, and that's pretty much it, along with like an XML or a DRP, which we'll get to in a second. So for the sound side of things, excuse me, I got ahead of myself. I just said that. Using an XML to create a DRP at this point. That's what I send over. So for the sound side of things, many fewer steps. The first is basically cleanup. And so these are like the three usual suspects in Final Cut, some keyframing that just needs additional cleanup. I will often see editors keyframe something to 0 dB and then leave the rest of the clip there for anyone to stumble over, or clips that have been silenced or deactivated. And so I will scrub through meticulously and make sure none of that stuff is there before creating an AAF that goes out to the mixer. And for that, we use X2 Pro. And then if any changes come along, we'll use Changeless X, which are both fantastic applications. And of course, we QC at every stage. I'm watching these episodes constantly until my eyes fall out, and making sure that everything looks, spick and span. And yeah, I'll bring Felipe back.
Yeah. So basically, that's what we had. All of these sets of challenges. And for every challenge that we were faced, we had a solution to do this. And in the end of the day, we are all working in film for a reason or another. And Stephen has always very nice words to say right now. So, Stephen.
So I caught our director interacting with someone who'd watched the show and screen capped this little tweet going on with them. And so it was kind of nice to see that, we sign up for these hard jobs with the intention of hopefully seeing a day where the media gets out to its target audience. And so kind of doesn't really matter where you stand politically. It was nice to see that Cullen was interacting with someone, and it seems to basically have made it so that this person was having a conversation with a family member that they wouldn't have otherwise had because of the show. So that was awesome to see. And of course, it's important to remember that Felipe and I are obviously the ones here presenting, but who doesn't normally get a lot of love is assistant editors. And so we're two people of like 9 that made this crazy machine work. So we just want to throw their names up on the screen.
From cradle to grave, how long was this project?
I believe it was 3 years, 3.5 years for Cullen, and Felipe and I were brought on for like the last 6 months.
Yeah. And what would you have wished you had been able to say 3 years ago when someone was planning to, if he had come to you and said, I'm planning to do this thing? I mean, obviously that never happens. I mean, you get documentaries, you kind of slide into it, but you suddenly end up there. But when you look at all the footage and you look at everything that you got, what did you wish you had
that he had done when you came in 6 months left? What do you wish you had had a meeting about 3 years ago to make the job easier?
I will say that actually not specifically for this project, but for all documentary projects in general. I will say it doesn't matter if you plan on doing it by yourself or if at some point you want to work with a team. Media management from the very beginning. Do not use original clip names from cameras such as Sony and Panasonic cameras, as long as you're able to rewrap those and etc. Rename those clips. If it's a RAD RAW, if it's ARRI RAW, if it's any other RAW format that has sidecars or span clips through multiple files, then of course you're not going to be renaming those, but then you have real name, you have a bunch of identifiers that makes those files unique. It's very important to have unique names. It's very important to be organized and keep track of everything. And very good organization in the very beginning can save you a lot of money and a lot of time. And this is for every documentary in the world. I mean, anyone here that has worked on a documentary will know, mainly colorists. Colorists get documentaries in the very end, and then suddenly you have a lot of media to manage or problems to solve. And all of this can be mitigated and make it a lot less of an impact down the line if it's done in the very beginning.
Yeah, it's been the number one thing that we've run into with documentary work is just media management. Like, because you're shooting in the field and you're tired, and you know a lot of times you get into this thing where you just get this pile of footage that is really hard to figure out what happened there. Go ahead, Sky.
So yes, as an editor and also a finisher, I have run into this, and now that I'm making a documentary, I'm realizing I may have been my own DIT, not recommended, but that's who I had. But consequently, now I'm eating my own, problem in the back end. So where I'm trying to get to the question is, you're saying go ahead and rename the original source file versus having that semicolon /3, all the numbers that, okay, Alex is nodding his head yes. Now to that question, I've been trying to put the day and the location and the camera in the naming convention, because that way I've got a chance that that clip name means something. So to a DIT, which I would love to have had, help me.
That's exactly the point. It's having the clips being meaningful to you. You look at the clips and at a glance, you know where they belong to, right? The problems with not renaming
because we don't have scenes. We don't have scenes yet. We don't see that's in a narrative. You would have scene 1, take 3, whatever. But this is like a duck on Friday in the blue of the water. It's like, what does that mean? So how
and if you get a Sony camera would do clip 0001, 0002, and then you do 1 card, 2 cards, 10 cards, and then you have 10 times clip 0001. And Final Cut will do one thing to relink on Final Cut. If Final Cut will match first the name, and then it's gonna match time code, length, frame rate, and audio channels. Now, if you're using 2 A7Ss and you're running both of them at the same time, and they run to the maximum amount of duration that they can record, for example, in A7S2 is 29 minutes, 59 seconds, you have identical clip 001 for first camera and second camera, and then Final Cut will relink the wrong file. I guarantee you. So once the name is unique, you're starting to get rid of that type of problem there.
Yep. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Chris.
Yeah, that goes back to
and
what
comments, by the way, if
Felipe-
you're and Mickey's going to make a comment, but make sure if any new questions from the panel, make sure to put them into Makana. But go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. Oh, that goes back to what Felipe was mentioning earlier, that the actual cinema cameras, the REs, Canons, even the Black Magic Pockets are able to properly handle metadata. So with those, there's really no need to rename the camera RAWs. But with cameras that aren't really designed specifically for cinema use, like the A7Ss, you would want to go through and manage the naming of the raw files.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I find that there's definitely two schools of thoughts when it comes to renaming camera originals, and you will talk to people in both camps, and they are both emphatic that they are right and the other half is wrong.
It's religious,
without a
yeah.
doubt.
It depends on what I'm shooting. A lot of times I'll leave the camera files the way they are because the way I archive. So I archive straight off the set, and I want to know where those things are. So I have a tendency to not do that. But in a large documentary, I'd rename everything or some of the ones that I've worked on because I can't find it otherwise. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, this is also why having proper crewing, it's not always possible with the documentaries which usually have budgets that fluctuate. But if
That's such a nice way to say it.
Budget?
If possible, like at least have at least one AC around. Have someone who is able to maintain camera reports. Like, this magazine was used on this date on this camera. Just so that it's just going to help so much down the line, not only for the assistant editor's process of doing things, but even sound can benefit from that in terms of finding which tracks go with which cards, which takes, which magazines.
Had you been in my life 3 years ago, Mickey?
But Sky, you're gonna have to calm down. We have to keep moving. Go ahead, Felipe.
And the other thing that's a good point here is, for example, in a project like this that you have a lot of different camera sources, a lot of different types of files, standardizing the type of file that you're going to work on, it will help you. For example, MXFs, there is support for MXF on Final Cut, but you do not want to deal with them because you can't easily relink MXFs to, let's say, proxies that are MOVs. You have to relink them one by one. So rewrapping that to an MOV without really changing what's inside, it's a good way to go. Or I know that Alex, for example, I'm pretty sure that if Alex takes a lot of different sources from everywhere, he's gonna transcode everything to ProRes.
Yeah, I'll conform everything to. Usually, what I try to do is conform everything to a bucket that's bigger than what they were going into. Like that is as big or larger than what they were holding, so that I'm not truncating them in any way, but I get them all into the same thing. I definitely tend to approach it that way, Mickey.
And yeah, these decisions ideally are made during pre-production and not while you are ingesting the first day's cards.
That's in the best case. We're possibly working on a documentary later this year, and we're gonna have those meetings early. All right. Let's jump into the questions. We'll have some discussions. Anyway,
I moved up Roscoe's because it seemed germane to what we're talking about right now. Is there an example of an ideal naming convention, or is that one of those it depends things that no one could figure it out?
There is. I think I can point you guys. Best place to go really is Frame.io. Frame.io has a workflow guide. And in that workflow guide from Frame.io, there are studies of good use cases of naming conventions. The one that Sky mentioned is very simple and very useful for documentary. Year, month, day, name of what it is that you're shooting, and then a numerical identifier 001. So everything is unique. Camera A, let's say camera A, tape 1. I'm calling it tape, but it should be card, right? But doesn't matter. As long
camera?
as that is easily identifiable.
One little thing that I do is that number one is I take a lot of behind the scenes photos, partially because it gathers the location on my phone. so and if you are really adamant about time on the camera and time on your phone, you take these little photos and you'll know where you shot that because the times line up. And then the other thing is that if I have a slate, I don't start rolling camera until the slate is full frame, until I can read the slate in the frame, so that everything I open has the preferably the time code and the name in the very first frame. So when you're looking at a whole pile of them in a folder, you can actually know what you're looking at without having to jump into it if there's a slate.
And the other thing is setting your camera to the right date on camera and time goes a long way.
Oh yeah, saves so much time. And we try to get it down. Like you'll see me sitting there fiddling with it because I'm trying to get it down to the atomic second, so that it's right on because it lines up with the behind the scenes photos of my camera. All right, let's go ahead into the questions.
Brody Hafner, New York City, has the first one. Location dialogue throughout the series was remarkably clear and consistent, despite very challenging conditions, from urban streets to moving vehicles to airports and even pig pens. Could you discuss collection and the management of audio?
Mixpre, Sennheiser microphones, lavalier. There were also boom microphones at some times. And I don't think he was using the noise canceling from the Mixpre at that time. I don't think it was there yet. And of course, the sound mixers, the guys that work on the post-production of the sound, they make miracles. That's I can tell you that. Steven, anything you want to add?
Oh no, I just agree with 100% of that.
Next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz in Chicago is back in with, when notching the video for color, how are any dissolves or transitions handled?
That's a great question. So for notching, we will, so imagine if there's a clip with two clips with a dissolve in between them, I will excise those two clips. I'll bring them out of the edit and I will drop them in at the end of the sequence. This is before I make my high-res QuickTime. Once they're dropped at the end of the sequence, I will remove the dissolve or any other effect for that matter, and I will add handles to the A and B side of that transition such that it would cover the dissolve once reapplied later. So the idea is that they are they're recreated over with the finishing artist. So there'll be gaps left in the high-res QuickTime, and they'll use my reference QuickTime to fill in the blanks essentially and to rebuild those transitions.
Next question.
Alex Golner from London is in next with, how did you select the editors and assistant editors to work with? This was one from the earlier.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that our director answered, and I'm gonna play the answer to that right now.
No audio.
Oops.
Okay, hold on. Sorry. So let's stop that real quick. Take two of that. Hold on. Is there any other question? Just so I can take a look at the audio routes here.
Sure. What if you need a transition was the next one, but we've kind of dealt with that. So we're moving on to Edwin Ruiz's question in Chicago. And he says, can you talk about how you built the trust relationship with the subjects and created such ease and allowing them to look so authentic? It's kind of a director's question too, but.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah. And Cullen does answer a little bit of that in one of the clips we have from him, but I can elaborate a little bit while Felipe is getting ready. Cullen spent a lot of time with his subjects. He lived with them, he traveled with them, he visited and constantly contacted them. He was on calls regularly and just sleuthing the web to see what they were posting, how they were interacting with others, and was watching what was happening on the websites that he was tracking where they were all active. It was a lot of really intense investigation that he kind of threw himself into over the course of those 3 years.
Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois. Felipe's presentation is the best use of SuperSource on the Atem he's seen, presumably. We need second hours as he has set the presentation bar so high. I agree with that.
So now I have to admit that I was like, I'm hoping someone asks about the actual presentation. We'd probably do a whole nother second hour on how you did the second hour. This is all in the Atem?
It is all in the Atem.
And you're using, what are you using to do the super sources?
So there is a channel on YouTube that these guys created macros and a companion configuration file that goes for you to use on your Stream Deck. And that's how I'm actually able to bring in these transitions. Those are flying, what is it called? Flying cuts for the boxes. And these guys did a fantastic job. I'm just using the work that they've done.
And who is it?
I'm pretty sure that I need to send a link. I want to say that their the name of their
A2Z.
Their YouTube channel is H2Z. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's pretty impressive. Yeah.
Really makes a nice online presentation, I must say. So we could
Yeah.
probably
I
even
can
pull them
try.
on.
I can try Colin's answer to the first question now.
Yep. Let's go ahead
Can
and
we do
go
that?
for it. Yep.
Okay.
How did you select editors? For Q Into the Storm, it was a little bit tricky, of course, because we were editing on Final Cut X.
Really
and
not?
Most editors who are used to working
That's
in
strange.
TV,
I have it.
I found were
I got
very proficient in Avid and were a
it's just
little
me.
skeptical about using Final Cut. I had been editing on Final Cut for the last few years because I found it to be way faster. I could edit about 25 to 30% faster in Final Cut X than I could in any other system. As I think Tom put it, it makes editing fun again. Fortunately, I did manage to find a couple of editors who had experience in Final Cut X and were big fans of it. And then we found editors who were willing to give it a shot. People were surprised how little time it actually took to adapt to Final Cut X. I think for most of the editors, they were up and running, not at their full Avid speed, but at a fast enough speed by about a week in. We also had to find individuals like Felipe and Steven who had thought about how to do a remote workflow using Final Cut X so that all the libraries would stay in sync. So the selection process was partially based on a willingness to engage with Final Cut X, but it was also based on a willingness to work on an incredibly aggressive timeline. And I needed editors also who were excited about the material, which I found that everybody actually was really I guess, inspired and enthusiastic to work on the project. Another way that I would select editors for the project, of course, was based on past things that they had cut, if I felt that they had the right sensibility for the project. So that was the first criterion.
All right.
That's great.
So there it is, the answer for the first question.
And I think we have one last question here. Go ahead.
Randy Egan in Vancouver says, did you use a digital asset management system or asset tracking software? I think you mentioned Kino and some things, but
yes, Kino.
And Kino, can you explain a little bit more, since we have a little bit of time, just explain Kino in a little bit more detail?
Okay, Kino. Very first thing is not a media asset management, but it works like one. It does not require a server, which is very important for a lot of workflows that I like to work on. So what happens is Kino immediately, once you open, you can drill down through any drive that you have on your system. So immediately you're able to see all the media that you have. But of course you can go folder by folder. Once you look at that media, you can look in a list view. And in the list view, you can have columns for a lot of different metadata fields, such as scene, take, shot, angle, description, and a few others, and frame rate. And you can easily search things by anything that's the metadata within a file. And once you add that metadata, kind of stores that metadata in a sidecar file, in a hidden folder within the same directory as the media. So if I am synchronizing that folder with another editor, immediately those sidecar files get to the other person. And if that person has Kino open, the metadata just populates there. So that's the reason why we end up using Kino, because we are already synchronizing the files. So we have an application that does not require a server, but we have a server-like functionality in that regard.
That's great. Fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I have a question for Felipe. This obviously had very sensitive deadlines. I mean, you've got I don't know how early in the process you had a broadcast date or things like that. So you're in a workflow that you haven't really, I mean, you've done parts of it, but you've never, this is not the 15th time we've used Final Cut to do a broadcast documentary for HBO. In that sense, talk about the deadline and deadline pressure and how you felt you were able to manage that.
I think Steven and I will have to answer because probably both of us have similar but also different opinions. So let's get Steven to answer first so I can think about mine.
I think, I give a lot of credit to Felipe for this. I've been working in Final Cut almost exclusively for like 7 years, but Felipe still came to the table with strategies I hadn't seen before. And those strategies really helped us, keep the work going around the clock, truly. And that was kind of one of the only ways you can, it's brute force to manage a schedule like this. You just have to keep everybody working, got to keep that uptime, and you got to, think ahead about the problems as much as you can to make sure that no one's going to end up stranded on an island where they can't access footage, can't access a cut, can't review something. So it's just sort of like constantly, I sort of imagine Felipe and pretty much the rest of the team of assistants as people playing, like chess, but with another group. Like, how you ever see one person just circling a table or many tables of other players, 1 versus like 20. That's what the assistants were doing, essentially. They were running around managing all these complex issues together and on their own, just to stay ahead of things. It was pretty incredible.
A couple last questions we'll just do real fast. Go ahead, Bill.
Roscoe Jones is in with, how would this work have benefited from Frame.io? But you use Frame.io at the end part, right?
We did use Frame.io. We used Frame.io for internal reviews, reviews that were between editor, director, and executive producers, and of course, anyone else that had an input, creatively speaking. We were doing that through Frame.io, and then later on, once that cut needed to go to HBO, then it was through HBO's methods.
Next question.
Leland Best in Corona, Michigan. Our friend says, how many hours were slated for the editors to do the finishing on the project?
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of hours.
All of them. I don't know if we can put a number on that. I don't know if it's
6
countable.
months times days times hours.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went. Yeah.
I mean, usually for documentaries that I've worked on the BAEZ, the editors just get slated like, hey, we're going to pay you. It's not per hour. It's just like, we're going to pay you this much per month or this much per week. And it's going to be crazy. And are you willing to do it? And then they go, yeah, exactly. All right, next question. We're going to finish this up.
Cre8ive Beast is back with, while you said you didn't use the Final Cut Pro 10 metadata to hold the transcription, have you looked at anything like Lumberjack or any of the others that automatically put the transcripts into the metadata?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we were to revisit the question of what would we have hoped to have chatted with Cullen about if we had, miraculously been there and with him and knew each other 3 years ago when he started, I would have told him about Lumberjack. I think Lumberjack would have been an amazing solution for what he's doing.
Right. Very good. Hey guys, thanks so much. Stephen, Felipe, it's just really amazing presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Really, really great to have you. And I will talk to you about this other little project that I'm working on. So we'll chat about that. It could be cute. Anyway, thanks so much. It really, really good. As soon as Felipe said I could show something, I'm like, yes. I don't even know what it is. I was like, whatever you want to show. I'm like, I'm in. So you did not disappoint. So thank you so much for this an incredible presentation and incredible material. I think it really opens people's eyes to where all of this is going, because this is where it's all going, right? I mean, you're on the front edge of what is going to be how we produce an enormous amount of this content. Go ahead, Felipe.
Can I say something? I just want to give credit where credit is due. Of course, there was a whole team of people on the project side. Although I was driving the whole look of the show and how everything went here, Stephen created the whole keynote. This guy is a keynote master.
Gorgeous keynote. Like I definitely was like, ooh, I really like what he did there. So I definitely was, as someone who does a lot of keynotes, I was definitely scribbling down some stuff. Looked amazing.
I appreciate that. Studied a lot of WWDC for that.
Yeah. The perfect place to do it. Yeah, they have a company called Duarte that cleans those up. And I spoke at keynote at WW one year, and I learned that there's a design firm that makes that work. So yeah, it's good study.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyway, thanks. So great job for our producers. Thank you for the great questions and keeping the conversation moving. And thank you for the panelists for a great first hour as well as the second hour. Just well done. Again, somehow we keep doing it every day. All right, we're going to jump into the post show. See some of you there. See the rest of you tomorrow. All right, we are going to talk about